Welcome back to Outside Views, and today we're diving into a crisis that has been brewing in the valleys and hills of Wales for nearly a decade. The arrival of the Sustainable Farming Scheme, or SFS. It is January 2026, and after years of delay, protests, and what I would call a total failure of post-Brexit planning, the new system is finally here. And my personal view is that we are watching a slow-motion disaster for the Welsh family farm, and that's a direct result of trading a stable and albeit imperfect European system for a bureaucratic nightmare designed by people who seem to have never set foot in a cowshed. And the outside view is that this isn't just a policy shift, it's a fundamental betrayal of the promises made back in 2016. You all will remember the red bus and the promise that farmers wouldn't lose a penny. Well, here we are in 2026, and the reality is a 40% cut to the basic payment scheme for anyone who doesn't sign up for this new green checklist. And I believe that the Welsh government is essentially holding the rural economy hostage, forcing farmers to choose between financial ruin or becoming unpaid park rangers for a government that has its priorities completely backwards. And this is what happens when you prioritize green targets over food security, and it is really heartbreaking to watch. Let's look at the facts of what this landmark moment actually looks like for a farmer in the Vale of Glamorgan or somewhere there. And to even get the entry-level payment, farmers now have to tick off 12 so-called universal actions. We're talking about mandatory soil testing, benchmarking, integrated pest management, and even attending online courses on sustainability. But the real kicker, the one that has been the enormous roller coaster for the industry, is the habitat requirement. Every farm must now actively manage at least 10% of its land as habitat. And my view is that this is a classic example of one-size-fits-all urban thinking being forced onto a diverse landscape. If you are a hill farmer with plenty of scrubland, yeah, you might be okay. But if you are a high-intensity dairy farmer, the backbone of the Welsh agricultural economy, this is a nightmare. Many dairy farmers are telling people that they simply don't have that 10% of non-productive land. And I believe that for them, this scheme is actively a demand to downsize or disappear. And as one farmer, Gethin Hughes, pointed out, if his friends have to cut back on cows to meet these habitat rules, there's literally no point in them carrying on farming. And the history of the scheme is a saga of protests and broken trust. In 2024, we saw the largest agricultural protests in the history of Wales. 3,000 farmers at the Senate, tractor go-slows, and 55 pairs of wellies left on the steps to represent the 5,500 jobs the government and their own impact assessment said could be lost here. And the government was forced to blink. They delayed the scheme by a year and removed the hated mandatory 10% tree cover requirement. But my personal view is that they just swapped one 10% for another. They call it habitat now, and they say it's co-designed. But the underlying pressure to stop producing food and start producing ecosystem services is still exactly the same. And let's talk about the money, the social value payment. For decades, Welsh farms received over £300 million a year in EU subsidies. Now the budget is being held at around £238 million for the universal layer in 2026, which doesn't even begin to account for the massive inflation we've seen in fuel and fertilizer and feed. And I find it insulting that the government expects farmers to do more work for less money while calling it a landmark achievement. And the political fallout in 2026 is becoming a massive headache for the Welsh Labour government. We are just months away from the Senate elections in May, and the rural vote is in total revolt. The Welsh Conservatives are calling the SFS not fit for purpose, promising to replace it with a food security first scheme. And Plaid Cymru is demanding a much slower transition and more funding certainty. And then, of course, you have Reform UK, who are currently surging in the polls by telling farmers exactly what they want to hear. That this is all a hammer blow to the rural economy, driven by radical green targets. And my view is that the government has handed Nigel Farage a golden opportunity on a silver platter. By making the SFS so bureaucratic and so anti-production, they have alienated the very people who manage 90% of the Welsh land area. And when you treat farmers like they are the problem rather than the solution to climate change, you shouldn't be surprised when they turn to the most radical political alternative available. And the outside view is that Wales is becoming a laboratory for a type of post-production agriculture that the world simply cannot afford. We're living in an era of global instability where food security should be the top priority for any sane government. And yet in 2026, Wales is telling its farmers to plant trees, manage scrub, and attend webinars while the cost of milk and meat continues to climb for the average family. And I believe that the sustainable in sustainable farming scheme is a lie. There's nothing sustainable about a policy that drives family farms out of business. And I know what I'm talking about. I'm not a farmer. But in all directions here, I only have to go 100 meters or a little bit more, but not much more. And I'm standing on a family farm. Although I'm living in a flat here, in the center of a village that's part of a major city. But nevertheless, I can imagine how they feel, because I talk to a lot of farmers every day. And the deputy president of the NFU Cymru, that's Abby Reader, says the first indicator of success will be how many farmers sign up by the May 15th deadline. But my view is that this high sign-up numbers won't mean the scheme is good. It will just mean that Welsh farmers are so desperate for that 60% of their old subsidy that they have no choice but to sign their own death warrants. They are being forced to choose between a cliff-edge 40% cut or a death by 1,000 universal actions. So in conclusion, the SFS is the ultimate symbol of the Brexit hangover. It's the product of a country that wanted to take back control but ended up with a government that has no idea how to use that control responsibly. And I'm also talking about the devolution governments. And the Welsh government says they are proud of this scheme, but I don't see much to be proud of in a policy that replaces productive fields with benchmarking and a pesticide checklist. We are watching the erosion of a cultural and linguistic heritage that has defined Wales for centuries, all for the sake of a few green headlines. And my personal view is that we will look back at January 2026 as that moment the Welsh government chose ideology over industry. The wellies on the steps of the Senate weren't just a protest, they were a warning. And as the first SFS application starts trickling in this March, that warning is louder than ever.